Over at the White House, Vice President Kamala Harris just wrapped a meeting with prominent groups representing black women, including members of the Black Women's Roundtable and the National Council of Negro Women. The White House extended an invitation to meet, I'm told, after some of the group's members were arrested yesterday at the U.S. Capitol while protesting in support of voting rights legislation. Some of those folks were zip-tied and arrested and taken away by Capitol Police. Now, President Biden has repeatedly made it clear that he sees the wave of Republican-backed laws restricting ballot access across the country as an existential threat to American democracy. But can a federal solution actually make it to the president's desk? We're going to take a closer look at this issue with Ms. LaTosha Brown. She's co-founder of the Black Voters Matters Fund, and civil rights attorney Debo Adegbile is with us as well. So, LaTosha, we'll start with you. You just came out of that meeting with the vice president. What were the takeaways?
You know, I think there were three takeaways. One, we were able to have a frank conversation with Madam Vice President around our concerns of voting rights and the state of voting rights in this country right now. You know, secondly, I think we were able to have assurances from the Vice President that she is deeply committed to this issue and that will work in conjunction with those that are on the ground, but that this administration takes it very seriously, this voting rights piece. And I think the third piece, I think the sense of urgency. You know, what we wanted to do in this meeting is to believe that there was a sense of urgency and that the White House would use the full weight of the administration to really be able to push voting rights. Those were the three big takeaways. You know, and I think the fourth piece is that this is an open conversation. That is an ongoing conversation, and this is a fight. We were very clear about that as black women. We're going to be relentless around this issue, that we're going to stay the course because we need For the People Act and the John Lewis Voter Advancement Act.
Did the vice president get into specifics, you know, how she intends to use the full weight of the administration to bring this about?
You know, a couple of things. One, she was able to open and accept some of the recommendations. She was very open to some of the recommendations that the women who are experts in this area were able to share. But also she was able to share some of the things that she was doing in terms of even being able to interagency, to really be able to activate the White House, the different agencies, the different departments to make this a core issue. And so there was an exchange of ideas around how we move this forward and was very promising.
LaTosha Brown, I want to ask you about what happened yesterday, because you were part of a peaceful demonstration yesterday in a Senate office building. And it strikes me sort of the importance of civil disobedience when it comes to voting rights, that LBJ would not have signed the first Voting Rights Act back in 1965 were it not for the movement that preceded it. That piece of legislation was not the result of closed-door meetings here in Washington. It was the activists who, at the time, who really dramatized the issue, who demonstrated what was at stake. Do you see a parallel between what you all are doing now and what happened back then?
Oh, absolutely. I think that the way that we actually strengthen democracy is that people have to hold our elected officials accountable. That's why we went to the Senate, in the halls of the Senate, to say that we're not going anywhere. This is, you know, we have to think about it. It was 1965 when we were talking about the Voting Rights Act. It is 2021. And now what we're seeing is we're seeing a full-fledged coordinated attack, particularly on black and brown voters in this nation, because they participated in the process. We're not willing to go back. We actually have to move forward and strengthen democracy in this country. We have to build the political infrastructure and the policy to make sure that all voters, no matter where you are, whether you're in Alabama or Iowa or California, you have equal and fair, open access to the ballot. And that's why we have been relentless and will continue to be relentless around forcing, really demanding the passage of the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voter Advancement Act.
Debo, you were involved in defending the Voting Rights Act in that landmark Shelby County case in which the Supreme Court ultimately gutted the pre-clearance requirement, which said that states with a history of racial discrimination in voting had to get a certification in advance or pre-clearance before they made any changes. Talk about what the erosion of the Voting Rights Act means for the whole host of laws that we're seeing passed now.
Well, the Supreme Court has substantially cut back the major tools in blocking and deterring voting discrimination. So it makes it harder for voting activists like LaTosha and like the voting rights groups and people around the country to fight back against so many of these measures that are intended or result in imposing obstacles in the way of minority voters. And these decisions have been terrible, and they are reasons why we need the legislation to come forward out of Congress to level the playing field and really to have the nation recommit itself to the minority inclusion principle that the Voting Rights Act represents.
Is legislation the only option as you see it? I mean, is it practical to think that voting rights advocates could fight this out state by state, court by court?
Well, the history has told us that doing it that way is very hard. While litigation and fights in the courts are an important piece of the movement for voting rights and inclusion, they are only one piece. And a larger remedy that would try and block some of these things before they happen, as the preclearance provision did, would be a lot better and a lot more effective than having to go county by county, town by town, state by state to try and block these things. It's really difficult to win these cases. They take a long time. They cost a lot of money. They get appealed through the courts. And very often, elections are happening before you can get a result in the case. So you actually have people sometimes elected who might not have been proper office holders if the system had been fair. And so it's really important to have legislation as part of the effort, though we will continue to wage this fight for democracy in courtrooms as well.
Yeah. LaTosha Brown, a question about how we talk about all of this. The right to vote freely is a fundamental American right. And yet so often the way we talk about voting rights, the way we cover voting rights, we talk about it in terms of it being a partisan issue or, frankly, in terms of it being a black issue. What do you see as the risk of that?
You know, I think what is happening is we have to be honest in that black and brown voters have been targeted. They've been the target of this, but we also have to understand how interconnected our history, our fate is, that fundamentally when you weaken democracy for some, you weaken democracy for all of us. And so that there is an attack on the very foundation of this country. Where you don't have free and fair access to the ballot, you don't have a strong democracy. And so we need people to really understand kind of the connectivity around that. The second thing that I think is really important for us to understand is that this is not just a national attack, that what we're seeing is we're seeing communities be attacked on the county level, on the local level, on the state level, and on the federal level. It's like a trifecta effect. And so we're going to have to, we cannot organize our way out of this. We cannot litigate our way out of this. We're going to have federal legislation that literally gets us closer to what the Constitution says, what the Declaration of Independence says, so that people, that all citizens of this country, whether they live in Alabama or California, have equal and fair access to the ballot.
Yeah. Reporters were let into the end of that meeting you attended with the vice president. I'm told we have some video that we can play back now. Let's take a look.
Is this that LBJ moment on voting rights? Are they making you do it, or making Republicans in Congress do it when it comes to voting rights?
No one is going to make us do what we know is our right and responsibility, which is to fight for our democracy and fight for our rights every day of the week. And this is, let's be clear, not about any one racial group or gender group. This is about all Americans. This is not an issue about Democrats versus Republicans. This is about Americans. And this group of national leaders are very clear about that. This is a fight for all people, regardless of who they voted for in the last election or who they vote for in the next election. Thank you.
The vice president there talking about what we just talked about. She says it's a fight for all Americans.
Absolutely. You know, I think it's really important for us to really recognize that democracy, that right now we're literally democracy, American democracy is being tested. Are we going to go forward or are we going to go backwards? And we have to really recognize that voting rights impacts all of us, and that what we're seeing is a punitive measure. Think about it, that what you're seeing is black and brown voters in many of these states that have been targeted when we're talking about Texas and Georgia, that fundamentally because they participated in a historic election last year, now what we're seeing is punitive measures. What kind of message does that send about democracy? If we allow that to happen, then that completely undermines democracy. That is the actual definition of political corruption. That means the political party is trying to weaponize the administrative process to prevent certain people from participating in the process, and it impacts all of us.
Of course, we can't talk about voting rights without talking about the late Congressman John Lewis. Tomorrow, it will be a year since we lost him. And Debo, I understand after you were involved in litigating the Shelby County case, you spoke with him on the Edmund Pettus Bridge during one of those anniversaries. What did he have to say to you?
Well, he had actually attended the Shelby County argument. He was there to observe it and to witness history once again. And so when we reconnected in the shadow of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, I tapped him on his shoulder and I said, Congressman, I tried to speak truth to power, speaking about that oral argument. And he didn't say anything. He just grabbed me and gave me a big hug. And he said, you did. And that was a moment in which we were thinking about all that he and so many others had done all the way from that bridge to the court, the highest court in the land. And that fight continues today. And it continues in part because of the example of John Lewis and everybody who helped narrow the gap between the Constitution's high promises and low practices. And it continues because we will not be satisfied until we have equality, as the Constitution promises.
Ms. Brown, in the 15 seconds that remain, I want to give you the final word here.
Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. That is the spirit, and that's what I hear and remember about the late John Lewis.